This week on the Frame Savers, hey now, you're a Ristar.
No, John. No, not that one.
Welcome to the Frame Savers. We are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever tricks, glitches, and strategies we have available to us. And this week is episode 85. Did you know, Chad, I was born in 1985. So only 1,900 episodes more, and we will hit 1985.
Wow. That's really impressive. That also puts into perspective that you were very old.
Very, very old. So we are excited this week to be talking about a Genesis game called Ristar or Ristar. We will, I guess, debate that later. But before we dive into that, what have you been doing on the old Twitch this past week?
So, I mean, we've been on Thanksgiving break, and for a lot of people that doesn't mean going anywhere, but since I'm a teacher, I get a break, so I actually went and saw some family. I was all up and down the eastern seaboard. I traveled like 1,300 miles in total, I think, over the course of the Thanksgiving holiday. But once I came back, I actually played. So Glitchcat 7 is a really well-known Mario player, ROM hack player, and creates a lot of ROM hacks of his own. And he actually just created this brand new Super Mario Bros. 2 ROM hack that a lot of people have been going crazy over, called Return to Subcon.
Yeah, I was watching you play that last night. It looked like a lot of fun, really well designed, and we haven't seen ROM hacks really of SMB2 that I'm aware of up to this point. Maybe like sprite swaps and stuff, but it looked like a really well designed ROM hack.
Yeah, there's new tools that have been made for it. What did you do for Thanksgiving?
Well, I saw you at your home.
Very
briefly. You apparently have forgotten about such things. No, I had a good time. I went down to see my nieces in Georgia. On the way down, I stopped and saw Chad. That was a lot of fun, and hung out with him and Sky. We got to, I guess, did we play any video games? I don't even know if we played any video games.
I'm not sure we ever turned on video games while you were here.
Yeah, but we had fun not doing it. Sky played video games, and I watched her play some video games, and we all just chilled, and that was a lot of fun. I've been working on Parasite Eve speedrun. But since I was traveling most of the last week and a half and started a new job, mostly just been focused on that. I got to watch you play a little bit of that ROM hack. And, there's been some other stuff going on. The Link to the Past Rando Tourney's been on, which I've been able to tune into a couple times, a couple small things. But outside of that, haven't been able to watch much Twitch, but ready to get back on the horse for sure. And we've really been enjoying this past, I guess, couple weeks doing a lot of Genesis, right? Which has been an interesting change of pace.
Yeah, we always talked about how we wanted to do more, but it's kind of tough because, me and John are much more familiar with Nintendo. I think a lot of people in the speedrunning community are much more familiar with Nintendo, and because of that familiarity, we end up with, just a lot more runs being done on Nintendo consoles. So, when we finally find a Genesis game that's a good fit for us, it's worth talking about.
Absolutely. And this week we're talking about Ristar, which is a Genesis platformer. But in previous weeks, you talked a bit about Ghostbusters on the Genesis. We did an episode on Streets of Rage 2. I recently recorded a pocket for Golden Axe, which will be coming out, I believe, next Wednesday. So we've been touching a bit of Genesis, and it's been fun. I grew up with the Genesis. It's a good system, and when we first started the podcast, we really did do a lot of NES, SNES, and Game Boy, and we really have stuck to that. But it's been nice kind of the last month or so to I guess, get out of our comfort zone and play some Genesis games. And I'm really excited to talk about this one. It was recently run at GDQ by our friend Listar, and it's a really interesting speedrun and a fun casual game as well.
Before we jump into that, you want me to tell you about a few upcoming events we got going on?
I would love to know what I can watch coming soon.
So right after this episode releases will be the start of Winter Pride 2018. So that's put on by the same team as Power Up with Pride. That's going from December 6th to December 9th. And that will be at twitch.tv/powerupwithpride. There's also going to be from the French Restream, so twitch.tv/Le French Restream, is Bourg La Run 2018, which is a marathon that's put on by a lot of French runners. I've seen that marathon happen in the past, but it's not quite as frequent as a lot of the other events that are going on. So I think it's definitely one worth catching if you want to see what the French speedrun community has actually been up to.
Absolutely.
As of this episode releasing, it is already midway into, but really only breaking the surface of Really Really Longathon, which is a 14-day long marathon featuring a bunch of runs that are considerably longer than any of the others that you're used to enjoying. I think
3 total speed runs, right?
Yeah, it's made up of about 3 total speedruns. Well, the very first Really Really Longathon was based around the idea that the whole marathon was going on while Batten Kaidos 100% was running. So it started with Batten Kaidos beginning, and the marathon ended when it ended.
And it had Batten Kaidos? I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was in the corner of the screen oftentimes in the middle of other runs. They would give you like an update, a status update. I think you had to wait. I think we talked about this like maybe last year around this time, but they did you have to get some shampoo or something in that run, and it takes like a week to get.
Right, the 100% category requires all the items, and there happens to be one item in particular that requires like 300 plus hours of in-game time just for it to transform into the final item. So it's kind of a joke run that Baffin has taken extremely seriously and has actually done really great stuff with, but it's on its own, it's sort of maybe a slightly memey speedrun. There's also RGL TV's, so Retro Gaming Live TV's Coin Op Classic is going on. So that's December 8th and December 9th. It's that weekend, and it's going to feature a lot of arcade speedruns, arcade 1cc's, arcade playthroughs, things like that. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention was that RTA in Japan is going on from December 26th until December 31st. And that's going to be at twitch.tv/RTA in Japan. That's we don't often get a really great glimpse into the Japanese speedrunning /RTA community as it stands, and RTA in Japan has given us on Twitch a really great way to see what's going on with the Japanese community. So there's a lot of great runs there, and you can check it out at
absolutely
twitch.tv/RTA in Japan.
I want to give a huge shout out to Power Up with Pride. That's going to be an awesome marathon. It raises money for the Trevor Project, which I believe helps with suicide prevention for LGBT community. So I love that event. Definitely check that out. We got a lot of really cool stuff coming up in the speedrunning community. Sometimes we hit these lulls where we don't have a lot of events to announce, and here we got a whole bunch of them coming up, and then GDQ coming in January. So a lot of really fun events that you can go and watch while you're getting ready for that GDQ season. But as we said, this week we're talking about Ristar. We picked this because it actually tied for the listener selected episode, first place, right?
Yeah. So when we do our listener selected episodes, we let some of our patrons at higher tiers submit games to us, and then we take those games and we put them into one giant list, and we let all of our patrons vote on which one they'd actually like to see happen. And Ristar tied with Shovel Knight, and whenever they tie, we pick which one we want. We've done it in the past. Our very first listener selected episode was Zelda 2, but it tied with DuckTales, so we just decided let's do them both. One of them will be our listener selected episode, and one of them will be just another episode, so we're doing the same this time.
Yeah, we heard you. We heard the people. You wanted some Ristar, so we decided, hey, let's do some Ristar. Me and Chad knew nothing about this game before this episode. We hadn't really played it in the past or speedrun it, so really excited to dive into this game. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some of this hot Ristar music, and then we're going to talk about the background of the game.
So we're talking today about Ristar, Ristar. Do we want to do that debate now, or is that coming up later? I don't know how this
It's clearly
fits
Ristar. It's got to be.
Yeah,
it's an Rye.
It's a tough
That's
one
how English
because
works.
it's tough because it seems like the intent was probably for the name to be Ristar, but from everything I've seen, most people prefer to pronounce it Ristar. So I feel like it can go either way. I feel like this is ultimately the GIF debate. I think it's more or less what you prefer it to be, and what was intended is maybe not a necessary element in the debate. But I mean, if you look at the back of the box, it says "Catch a Rising Star." It feels like it's supposed to be Ristar, you know?
Rising Star.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was getting at there.
Yeah, I like it. And if you did it in Japanese, I bet you the katakana says Ristar, not R-A-I. So it's probably like, I don't know. I think it's Ristar. That's my
Okay.
Oh, he grabs things with his wrists though. That's good. He grabs things with his hands.
Okay, I feel like ultimately, if the character was meant to be named after the fact that he grabs things with his wrists, then he is instantly becoming an uncompelling character, or at least poorly named at that point.
You can't grab things with your wrists. That's not how science works. Yeah,
science can't
do it at home.
Science can't solve that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this game is a fairly common type of platformer. I feel like we see a lot of these Genesis platformers that are very colorful. The platforming is relatively straightforward with some interesting mechanics mixed in, but at its heart, it's really sort of the typical style of platformer that you see on the Genesis, with some really cool elements baked in. Things like being able to, grab onto things and swing, grab onto enemies and throw them, grab onto walls. It's a lot of grabbing. There's really a lot of grabbing happening here.
More than you'd expect.
The amount that I might expect.
Okay.
It is the amount
more than I do, I guess. That's the way things are.
This game came out on 3 consecutive days in 1995. So in North America, Japan, and Europe, it was released on February 16th, 17th, and 18th, respectively.
It's so strange. I've never seen that before, where it's just one day apart.
Yeah, usually either there's a big gap in time necessary for localization, or they're basically just released on the same day. So,
people in Europe were just waiting up 2 days in a row. Just when do we get Ristar? When do we get it? And after 2 days of no sleep, they finally got it back in 1990.
Yeah,
it was okay.
But the thing is on February 17th in North America, that's February 18th in Europe. So, basically it released on the same day. I don't understand time zones, but I'm pretty sure that the day that it dropped on North America probably was the same day as in
It could have been leap day, could have been daylight savings time. You never know. Yeah. Time zones are weird. But this game was developed and published by Sega, and so straight up Sega IP, and it had a bunch of ports and sequels. It was released at the same time for the Game Gear, but it's a largely different game, so there's just a completely different Ristar for the Game Gear, and then was also re-released on several Sega and Sonic collections. So there's a bunch of Genesis collections out there of, hey, play a bunch of these old Genesis games, Sonic, the type of compilations that came out a lot in the PS2 and GameCube era. It was on some of those, and there was also the Game Gear game was re-released, but only on a plug and play, like on a Sega plug and play that you plug into a television, which is kind of interesting.
Were those licensed by Sega? Like, were those plug and plays licensed by Sega, or were they sort of
generally
knockoffs?
They have to get the licensing rights in some way. I know that is the case.
Because whenever you see like those Sega plug and play, you're shopping in Sam's Club or something like that. I don't know where people are shopping these days. At your local Borders, and you see the Sega Genesis plug and play, like it feels like, it feels like it should be a bootleg, but at the same time, there's no way they're selling it in North America without the correct licensing rights. So
yeah, I believe they get the correct licensing rights for all of those Atari plug and plays, Pac-Man plug and plays, all of that stuff, and similar. I mean, really, these NES Classics and SNES Classic, all those are essentially plug and plays as well. They're just higher done, better done ones that are HDMI. But yeah, if you were looking to play the Game Gear game, and you want to play it on the big screen, you don't want to get your Game Gear modded, then go ahead and hunt down that plug and play. You can do it. But we're talking about Ristar, and when we talk about any game, it's very important, very imperative that we respect the lore, I think. Would you agree, or?
I think the lore can be important. Please explain to me why the lore in this case is important.
So we have two different lores here, which the plural of lore is lores.
Why is there two different lores?
Yeah, so there's Japanese lore and there's English. So in the Japanese lore, in the Japanese game, this takes place on planet Nier, and the people of Nier pray for a hero.
Not planet Nier, on planet Far.
I see what you did there. That's nice. But it's Neer, okay?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that ruined it.
And so the people of Nier, they pray for a hero because Greedy's the bad guy. You can tell because his name's Greedy, which is not a positive, personality trait to have. His mind control minion Rio snatches the planet's elder from Nier, and that's a bad thing. That's a negative thing to happen. But there's good news. There's good news. The prayers are heard. They reach the ears of the star goddess Oruto, and she wakes one of her children, which is Ristar, and wakes him to go ahead and stop Greedy and also stop all of the brainwashed leaders of each planet. So I guess Greedy and Rio have brainwashed all of these different leaders, so you have to beat them up too. That's why there's bosses. That's how they explain that.
Well, and that actually makes sense, because when you go to a psychologist and they say you've been brainwashed, the next thing they do is they pull out the boxing gloves.
Absolutely. And the ending, plug your ears, everybody, if you are concerned about the spoilers. Greedy and two henchmen, Ionis and Uranium, just going for, no Steves in this game. In this game. They're left stranded on a deserted planet with a picture of Ristar appearing in space. So that's the ending of the Japanese version. Now, the English lore is different. There is no Aruto, and Ristar has a fatherly figure called the legendary hero, who is a shooting star, and he protects the Valdi system. So that's good, and it's a good father to have. And the legendary hero was kidnapped, and you have to go rescue him. So not quite as much lore. The lore's less interesting. And the ending shows Ristar reuniting with his father figure. And I'm not even going to say spoilers for that, because this lore sucks. It's not as good.
It's not a story. It's like a Cliff's Notes.
And where's Ionis? Where's Uranium? I don't see those in there.
I missed Uranium the most. I think you also you still have the brainwashed leaders from Greedy, and you still have to beat up the brainwashed leaders and things like that. They kept the important parts.
Yeah, but they don't talk about it.
This definitely seems like the sort of thing, and Liz is mentioning it in the chat right now. This seems like the sort of thing where the amount of the backstory that's based on making prayers to some goddess, Nintendo would have pulled the plug on that instantly. And while I don't know necessarily what Sega's stance was on religious content in their video games, that seems like a compelling reason to change the story. That's the only thing that makes sense, because the story is so clearly better in the Japanese version. Like
Nintendo hates prayer.
Yeah,
they do the opposite of whatever praying is.
But we're not going to talk about Nintendo today.
In the face.
This is a safe area for Sega fans. We're not going to talk about Nintendo.
What's Sega? What is that?
That's the Japanese Nintendo.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess some of them liked prayer and some didn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would assume it's probably some sort of similar dynamic here involving a little bit of, I guess, censorship of religious things to avoid controversy. We've talked about this in the past. Nintendo used to take, crosses away from, backgrounds with churches and just little touches like that. Any religious imagery they try to remove. So
didn't they take the cross off of Link's shield in Zelda?
Yes, I believe so. And then just there's a whole smattering of games that for some reason that comes to mind is like Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti kind of stands out, this Japanese game, because it has all this like religious imagery in it that you see as you go through this church and there's people praying and all that. Never would have, if that got released in America, it would have been way different. So do
you think that has more to do with coming to America? I mean,
Japanese, yes, because there's that game for Nintendo called that just didn't come out in the US at all, that has Devil World that and those kind of games. I mean, just Nintendo of America was very intentional about not doing anything with religious imagery, whereas Nintendo of Japan seemed pretty open with having religious imagery and religious icons and such in their video games. So
yeah, that's an interesting game to have not come to America, considering that was, I think, Takashi Tezuka's first game, and he was such a major player in the Nintendo, in Nintendo. So for his first and perhaps at the time biggest game to not make it to America seems like but we're not talking about Nintendo. We're doing Sega.
What Sega?
It's the European Nintendo.
Oh yeah, I remember. Well, this game is on the Sega, and it's a platformer. It's a basic platformer, as you said, but kind of has its unique mechanic of allowing you to grab different poles or grab enemies in front of you, and a lot of the movement is based off that. So it's not just an attack mechanic; it's definitely a movement mechanic as well. So a lot of the levels are designed around scaling walls or climbing different poles, launching Ristar with these things called star handles. The star handles are these poles, I guess, in the middle of levels that Ristar can grab and then quickly swing around either clockwise or counterclockwise and pick up speed. And as he picks up speed, you can tap the button at any time to release and then go flailing off into any direction, which is called his meteor strike. That's his meteor strike, just so you know, which is science.
I'm glad it has a technical term, because I was really worried that they just phoned it in, like, oh, he zooms around. He's a real zoomy boy.
Yeah, I checked the manual. Thank you very much, and the manual says it's meteor strike. So this is like, I think we call it research. We did it before. We did on one of those other episodes.
I read through this manual. I gotta say, they really phoned it in on the manual here. I really have gotten, now that we've been, actually researching our episodes rather than just winging it every single time, I've really gotten into reading manuals for video games, and usually I really enjoy them, especially the Sega ones. The Sega ones are usually so detailed about everything you can do. They love to, like, not just explain the game, but explain the game in the context of the backstory for the game. And this manual, boy, it just phones it in.
Not a fan.
It just arrives and it says, don't forget to hit A, B, or C. And that's it. That's the whole manual. One page.
That is not true. That is not true. But yeah, so this game has different difficulty levels. So you got normal, and 5 lives. Hard difficulty also exists where you only get 2 lives. And the main mechanics are jumping, attacking, and then grabbing, and sometimes throwing. So certain items you can grab, and then you will be in possession of it, and then throw it. That comes into play later on as the levels go. I guess progress, you get some gameplay mechanics that aren't just straight platforming. For example, the metronome stage, you have to pick up these metronomes and get them to certain points of the level. So you do have to grab and throw the metronomes, throw them over spikes, avoid them getting grabbed from different enemies. There's no other way to attack any enemies outside of grabbing them. There's no jumping on top of enemies' heads or anything that I could really tell. I don't even think there's anything you can throw at them. So every enemy that you have to kill, you have to grab.
I really expected that because when you grab some enemies, you have the ability to throw them. I expected that to be able to do damage to other enemies, but I may have just messed it up, but I did not see any way to use enemies as weapons against other ones, which seems like a very strange choice for the ability to throw enemies.
Yeah, and also seems like a strange choice because you kind of fly across the screen whenever you grab an enemy. Like, it has this cool animation, and you would think, oh, if there's an enemy in my path, I can use this to kind of direct Ristar into hitting them or something. And feels a little bit like a missed opportunity. I'd agree a bit. And then there's little power-ups throughout the game. Nothing major. There's little stars that are yellow and black. They give you extra life. And then there's ones that are black and white that'll help you through traps. You can also find, I think they're blue stars that give you an additional star, a 4th star of health. And then also, if you only have, say, 1 star of health, it'll give you a full health refill. So those are always nice to find.
Yeah, I think
also,
it's specifically just meant to be a full health refill. There's also that golden gem you can find sometimes, but that's purely score. And I still want an explanation from someone why all these old games kept score. It just doesn't.
Then you can go score.
Okay, well now I understand.
Yeah.
This game also, I feel like one thing that it does pretty interestingly is it gives you pretty much full control over which way you throw your arms. So depending on what direction you're holding on the it's not a D-pad, it's a D-disc on the
It's terrible is what
Genesis.
it is.
Yeah, on the Genesis controller. Depending on what direction you're holding, that's what direction you throw your hands. Which you were mentioning, it felt or rather you were just pointing out that there's no way to jump on an enemy, but you can jump over enemies and grab them as you're going over them. And so once you sort of figure out that mechanic, once you figure out how much control you have over your hands, it starts to become less of a burden that you can't just jump on enemies or something like that.
Yeah, it's just definitely different. And there's no run button as well. which is kind of always a disappointment for sure. The moving animation's a bit slow, and the game has 7 levels. How long to beat? Estimates about 3 hours to beat it. Both of us beat about half the game in preparation for the podcast, and I had a really good time.
Yeah, I think it was a
we're
good
both
game.
traveling and stuff, and we'll get into that. But you got the flora, which is the grasslands. You have Undertow, which are the water levels. Scorch, which is fire. Sonata, which is a music themed stage. Freon, which is snow and ice. Automation, which is mechanical, and then Space City. There's also hidden bonus stages if you can find some hidden star handles, and it also has password save, which is a pretty nice feature for this game. It's not a long game, but it's definitely one that I could see breaking up over multiple play sessions, allowing you to. And there's also some cameos for Ristar. So just getting into some of the little bit of interesting tidbits and stuff. In Shenmue 1 and 2, you can get a Ristar figurine from a claw machine in the game, which is kind of cool. That's a Sega Dreamcast game that a lot of people quite enjoy. And also, Ristar makes a brief appearance in the intro video of a Japanese-only game named Segagaga, which I just put in there because I like the name. It's Segagaga.
Is that how you pronounce Sega Gaga? I don't.
Segagaga.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. I'll give it. Okay.
And then Ristar didn't make any more appearances until 2010, but he made a cameo in a downloadable track for Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing due to a high demand for him to be in the game. I don't know where this demand was emanating from. Maybe it was only Liz. I'm not sure, but that's pretty cool.
All of the Ristar fans were calling in. We got your phone calls. We got your postcards. We got your letters. You were saying to us, please include Ristar, and we did it.
Yeah, and he was also a flag man, which I'm assuming is one of the men holding flags.
That is my understanding as well.
I'm not a sports scientist, but in Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed in 2012. And then in 2012, also GameSpot gave Ristar a little bit of a shout out and called it a lost video game of the 90s that deserved to return. So unfortunately, this IP never really had any sequels, anything else, unless you count Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed as a sequel to Ristar, which I do not.
Did Sega ever have anything like Smash Brothers or PlayStation All-Stars where it had just like a huge
Power Stone or whatever? What was the one on Dreamcast? There's a fighting game on Dreamcast, I think it's Power Stone, that had a bunch of different characters from the different series that fought. It was a little bit different of a format, though. It was 3D. It was a little bit
Ristar
more...
just seems like the obvious choice to throw into a fighting game.
Yeah. Absolutely, but if you put it into Smash Brothers, I feel like nobody would know what Ristar.
No, I'm not looking for him to get put into Smash Brothers.
But
throw him in Sega's version of Smash Brothers that no one's gonna play. I'm just saying he seems like a fighting game character.
I don't think he even made the cut for the Power Stone series, unfortunately, but he tried his best probably. This game got pretty good reviews. Sega Official Magazine gave it an 87, which is nice of them to give their game that they both developed and published an 87 out of 100. I'm sure that was a really difficult review for them to do. Famitsu gave it a 29 out of 40, which is a very strange scale, but okay. EGM gave it a 38 out of 50. So middling, like decent scores. I mean, not like knocking it out of the park, but playable. It received more praise when it was re-released, actually, in the Sega and Sonic collections. I think a lot of people gained some awareness of the game from those, since a lot of people probably didn't play it when it came out. And it's often compared in all these reviews. You can find reviews for it from a million things from this time, so it's not one of those ones that's kind of hard to find the reception. It's often compared with Sonic the Hedgehog and Dynamite Headdy, which were two very popular games on Genesis. Also, we did this before Sonic the Hedgehog. Kind of offensive, huh?
Oh yeah, I feel like fans of Sonic have got to be like frustrated by that.
Yeah. Also frustrated because they're playing Sonic, so that's doubly so. Basically, some said that it was slower, more puzzle-based, and so some were saying that was a good thing. Some say that's not as good of a thing. Obviously, it doesn't really stack up against Sonic the Hedgehog in terms of that style of gameplay, but I also don't believe it was intended to kind of compete with that. Probably a little bit more similar to Dynamite Headdy, but it did often get praised for its graphics, music, and gameplay. So it got pretty good reviews. It was a pretty decent game. And that's about it.
I feel like comparing it to Sonic is maybe unfair. So the thing about this game is I feel like the story of this game, and we can talk about it a little more when we talk about our review, but I feel like the story of this game is really the story of missed opportunities. There's so much about this game that's great as is, but it could have been even better if the proper care and thought had been put into it. Like, I feel like Ristar is built as a character that you would expect to be able to build up some considerable speed. And you just don't get that in this game. It feels like a very plodding, slow pace the whole game, and you get these brief moments of excitement when you grab onto a star handle and you just fling yourself into space and you're like, that was fun, that was the fun part, and then you're just back to like slowly death marching your way to the end of the level. It's just very
I could have at least used a run button for sure in that instance. And you're right, the star handles are kind of a stark contrast to the movement speed in terms of gameplay, and you know, with Sega having these go fast kind of games like Sonic,
I thought this was going to be like I thought this was going to end up being like a Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse, where if you managed to get some speed, you could maintain that speed. I was saying to myself, it's okay that you don't have a run button, because when you run down a slope, you can jump off of it and keep that speed that you get, but you can't maintain it. You instantly just go back to that awful pace. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about our experiences, but ultimately reviewed decently well, and a pretty interesting, if not lost, platformer for the Genesis. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, listen to some fresh music, and then talk about our experience. So this week we decided to switch up our review section a little bit. We felt like it had gotten a bit stale going over these different categories, and so we want to have a little bit more of a free-form discussion just about our experiences playing this game casually, answer some questions about what makes this game stand out, what parts we like, what parts we didn't like. And so we're going to try and mix this section up. Tweet at us if you don't like it. If you do like it, let us know your thoughts. Hit us up in the Discord. But we've been feeling like this section's been a bit stale for a bit, so I'm hoping it'll be a nice fresh change. I don't know about you, Chad. You like fresh changes?
I like new things. We're definitely trying to change our format up a little bit. Now, very recently, we've been talking about changing our format up just a little bit. We like what we do, but we want to do it even better. So this is the first step of many toward making it better.
Maybe only we'll notice because we have to do this every 2 weeks, but for us at least, we will feel better about it. So we both beat about the same part of this game. I got through 3 stages, you got almost through 3 stages, and each stage is divided in half, so they're basically 2 levels each. So we beat about half the game. Of that part, what were your initial thoughts, I guess? What were your overall thoughts, I guess, to start off?
I found it relatively straightforward. I did not really run into any challenges until I got to World 3. That's really where I feel like the difficulty starts to ramp up. Even if you disregard, for instance, the boss fights, which vary on their own, but I think the levels themselves really don't start to ramp up until World 3. That being said, I think that despite my complaints about the pacing of this game, I think that it offers enough kind of interesting level design as you're going through it to have made it enjoyable. And given a longer timeline, I probably would have seen myself playing through the whole game. It was really enjoyable, so...
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the level design is pretty solid. I don't think the game's meant to be fast-paced, and that's okay. I would have preferred it to have a run button, but I did enjoy what I played. I didn't die until stage 3, like you said. Stage 4 was even getting harder, so I feel like the difficulty curve felt pretty fair, and I could see it having gotten pretty difficult. There were a few cheap sections, like one of the boss of level 3. I didn't like the second phase while you're falling and trying to attack him. That was really annoying, and honestly just felt cheap. But for the most part, I was enjoying it, and I was difficulty curve as well. My favorite part I would have to say is probably the swimming levels. Not that I love the swimming levels, but I felt like the swimming mechanic was pretty good. The controls felt good, and you know, you could go slowly and really direct yourself without some of that frustrating retro swimming, like, you know, in Mario it'll pull you down, or you'll have to continually tap A to stay afloat. It doesn't have any of that, so you can kind of freely move around. But then when you do the pumping for swimming, you do go considerably faster, but at the risk of not knowing what's in the next screen and what you might run into. So I thought that was a pretty well executed part of the game.
Yeah, I was definitely going to mention the swimming parts. When I realized that I was going into an entire water world, I kind of groaned. I mean, nobody loves water levels and nobody loves ice levels. That's just the truism of platformers forever. But I thought that the water levels were actually really good. There was a really interesting level design where you'd find yourself in a room that you're kind of locked, and then you have to figure out how to beat your way out of it, and the door opens. And then in addition to that, movement in the water wasn't frustrating in the slightest. For a lot of games, it's sort of, there's a natural downward gravity, and then you can swim against it. But for this one, it was point a direction and go. And I thought that that played really fun. I didn't feel held back by water. I actually found it really enjoyable. This is probably one of the games, this is probably one of the water mechanics in a game I've liked the most. I can't think of another game that's done water much better than this.
Sure. Unless you're playing Ecco the Dolphin.
But this was Ecco the Dolphin controls, right? You point a direction and you go.
Yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I don't think this realistic retro swimming where you have to continually pump to stay afloat is really that enjoyable. So I thought they did a really good job with that. I think least favorite part we've kind of covered. I think we both agree that it's a bit slow paced in terms of just the movement. You know, and that's okay. I would have also liked a variety of attacks, something else other than the grab. It felt kind of old, killing enemies. So you get to the point where you just kind of start jumping over them or passing them by because there's not much of a reward for killing enemies. That's another complaint, I guess. There's no drops really with the enemies. There's no, you know, way to really chain attacks or do anything. So it felt like the combat was just kind of lame.
Yeah, combat was unnecessary. I think it makes more sense to skip it a lot of times. There's a lot of really interesting level design in this, things where you can sort of transform the stage in different ways. So, you know, beat your head against the right wall enough times by grabbing it and pulling against it, and you get a bonus, or you might knock down a tree, which is crucial for you to continue making progress in the level. Little things like that. I really like those kind of things. So there's a lot of these, you know, poles that you grab onto the pole and you fling yourself around. I would have loved to have seen something like that end up being a speed mechanic, like in Magical Quest 2 Great Circus Mystery, where you can like latch onto a tree, and as you flip around the tree, if you jump off, you get like this huge boost of speed and you jump off of it. I would have loved to have seen something like that, but ultimately I think there's actually a lot to like about this game. The level design's really good, and the water mechanics aren't really frustrating in the slightest. Neither of us ended up playing the ice levels either. I did just want to mention that I can only speak to the ice levels from what I saw, but it doesn't seem like the ice mechanics are your typical ice mechanics either. It seems like there's snow, which acts like pretty much any other ground, and then there's ice, where rather than your controls just becoming more difficult to manage, you just naturally move in one direction. So it's almost like a conveyor belt that you're forcibly pushed in a direction from the way it looked. Which I feel like that might actually play better than your typical ice mechanics as well.
Sure. And I'd agree with you. I think the level design was nice in that it kind of rewarded you for some exploration. Not necessarily anything too special. I mean, I know you don't care about points. I don't care about points, but you know, there were times where I would fling myself with the star handle, or I would climb up something, or chain some climbing where you do a diagonal climb up a wall, and it would lead to treasure chests that I could open that might give me a health refill, extra life, some extra points. And maybe like the actual reward wasn't worth it, but it was nice that, you know, there were these clear points that this treasure chest was put here and you had to do something special to get to it. You know, you had to master the controls in a way that allowed you to climb up something, or grab an enemy that was in the air like a bird and use that to propel yourself over like a gap you couldn't necessarily jump on your own. So like, I think they designed the game really well like that, and I really appreciated that.
For sure.
What do you think makes this game stand out from other games? I guess there's a million platformers. We've played a million platformers. We talked about a million platformers. So what makes this, I guess, different than the average platform?
Yeah, I think that's tough because I think it does sort of fall into the natural. There just seems to be this running style that a lot of Sega platformers have that I feel like this one fits neatly into if you subtract out its little extra gimmicks and mechanics. But I think what makes it really stand out the most to me is the grab mechanic. So things like being able to use enemies in those ways, or for instance, I definitely had a few situations where I was like, I really just want to go over this wall instead of going a different direction. And so I would just keep grabbing the wall and climbing it, which felt like I was kind of beating the game. It kind of felt like I was subverting what it expected me to do and using that to just go my own direction. And that was kind of nice.
Rewards you for that too by hiding treasure chests up there, different things, and I like that quite a bit. I like the feeling of chaining the grabs together, and I think that's what makes the game unique as well. Like there'll be these giant pits that you kind of cross, and it's just poles, and it's not hard to go from pole to pole. Like it feels natural and good, but it also feels like you're doing something cooler than maybe you are. You know what I mean? And I think that's a nice, rewarding feeling, especially if I were a kid, which this game is clearly designed for. I think that's a really cool design. It also seemed like the game got a bit more creative. The metronome stage is a fairly creative stage, trying to kind of an escort mission, but not for, an NPC or anything, but just you have to get this metronome from one area to the next, and certain birds and things you would throw the metronome at and it would start singing and fly away and open up your path, or some things would grab your metronome and run back a screen and you'd have to go redo a section. I like that quite a bit. Also, the boss fights are fairly unique, I feel like, because of this grab mechanic. Instead of having a boss that throws rocks at you and you throw the rocks back or whatever every other retro video game does, this had a little bit more nuance to it, I guess. And I think especially for the speedrun we'll discuss later, chaining those grabs together and doing cool things is something that feels good.
Yeah, I think they really played the grab mechanic really interestingly. They made the bosses, I mean, exactly like you would expect them to do, but they did it well. They built bosses and obstacles and challenges around the mechanic that they had built. So they had this grab mechanic. So your first boss is, he's up too high, but if you grab him and sort of beat your head against him 3 times, then the creature that's on his back falls off, and then you can attack him properly. Or, in the second one, this enemy is going to fly by almost too fast to see, but if you can grab him, you can attack him. And so I think
it can also cause frustration, though, because the enemies, I mean, I don't know if this is good or bad, but a lot of the bosses will fly to the top of the screen and be out of the way. And that's kind of annoying, I guess. I mean, I don't know. A lot of these bosses are pretty RNG dependent if you're thinking about the speed run. But just even from a casual standpoint, there are often times where you just can't damage the boss and you just have to wait till they get on screen, whether it be the hammerhead shark or the level 3 boss that I was talking about. And that's kind of annoying, I guess. And I think that would have been nice to have a variety of gameplay, like I said, where you could maybe jump on something's head or throw something. Just having the one way to attack kind of got old. And
I do think that combining the grab mechanic with maybe the ability to jump on enemies' heads would have added an extra layer of cool gameplay. But I think all told, it's not unusual for a game to have an enemy that has sort of a cycle where you can only attack them during certain vulnerable periods. So I don't think you can really knock it all that much for that. But that being said, I think that they did find interesting and clever ways to build enemies and obstacles and bosses around the grab mechanic.
Absolutely. So an ultimate question for this, which I think is the most important question of any game, is could you see yourself playing this game again?
Yeah, I think so. I would definitely be willing to play this again. I look at the speedrun and I think that's kind of a cool looking speedrun. We'll talk more about, what makes it cool, but I would definitely see myself playing this again. It's a really competent platformer that looks like it would be fun to make your way through all the way blind, and probably has a lot of rewarding elements to it speedrun wise. How about you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree. I really like the music a lot. The music was bumping. It was really, upbeat, happy. For some reason, it was only playing in one side of my ears, which I don't understand why that was happening.
Did your other ear complain?
Yeah, well, yeah, it did. It didn't like that. It didn't get the rockin' beats that my right ear got, but I try and stay out of those kind of arguments
Sure.
between those two.
That makes sense.
But the music's really good. I think it's funny the stage screens like were clearly directly stolen from Sonic. Not
I
that
know.
it's stolen because it's they're both Sega, but it was just like this is literally a like I'm like going into what Emerald Forest. What is it? What is it called? Green
I thought
Emerald,
I thought I was
whatever the
looking
first
at
level of Sonic is.
I thought I was looking at Freedom Planet with how much I felt like Sonic was getting ripped off there. So
Wow. The sick burns of I don't know what Freedom Planet is, but I will assume that was a sick burn.
it's a Sonic themed fan game.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it felt like they were like, oh, just use those assets and put that in there. And there was the emeralds, the Chaos Emeralds. You know, I got a lot of Chaos Emeralds,
Yeah.
way more than I got in Sonic. To be
You're
fair.
a big Chaos Emerald fan.
Yeah, and I got way more of them in this game than I did in Sonic, so I think that's a big plus.
Okay.
But yeah, I could see myself playing it again. It is a competent platformer. I think it would be a really interesting speedrun to learn, if anything. I agree the speedrun's definitely more interesting than the casual play, which, I mean, we are both speedrunners, so we tend to see that a lot when we're playing casual games, but I think even more so than a normal
Yeah, I guess
game,
this
the
is
difference is more stark.
I guess this is where we mentioned that keep in mind that all of our complaints should be framed from the perspective of we are speedrunners at heart. And so when we say there's no run button, it didn't really make the game worse. It was just we're speedrunners and we would have had more fun going faster.
For sure. So here's our new question, I think. Instead of doing a rating, are you okay with this question?
I'm okay with it.
We didn't
Yeah,
talk
sure.
about this in the pre-production. We have a 4 to 5 hour pre-production meeting we generally go through. But would you pay $20 for this game? The 0 to 10, all this stuff. I think $20 is the perfect price point where you're like, I need my game to be good for it to be like, you know, it's right on that border.
I bought
What
some
do you
real
think?
garbage for $20. I'm just gonna put that out
me
there.
too.
So
I'm a
so
collector.
keep that
This might be a
keep
bad
that in
question.
mind.
I would. I think it's worth $20. I think this is I mean, maybe it's worth $15. Like, it's real close. But I don't think it's worth more than $20.
I'm thinking
in
to
that
myself,
$15 to $20 range.
I'm thinking to myself, if I saw this released as sort of a retro release on Speedrun on Steam,
On Steam, yeah.
would I pay $20 for this? I feel like
I don't think I would.
I would pay $20 if they released it with some extra content. Like
Yeah.
if they said we add an extra world as part of the release, or if it was on sale, then I would pay $15 for a game and I would say it's worth $20.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think this is a good, like, I mean, I think most platformers from this era, it's maybe $20. Maybe I should lower this to $15. I don't know. But this is like right in that range. This would be worth a grab on Steam, like you said, if it had some extra content, you know, or if it was, you know, it's got a decent length to it. It's got some difficulty as you go along, and it's got unique mechanics to it. So I think it's worth that. I mean, especially as the collector in me, I'm like, for $20 it would be worth it.
Yeah, that's ultimately a hard question to answer because it sounds disparaging to say I wouldn't pay $20 for it.
But you
I'm
hate
also
physical cards too.
Yeah, I don't
burn
collect.
them. You
Well,
burn them. You hate them. You
I
throw
don't-
them in the trash.
I don't burn them.
You light cigars with them. I've seen you do it.
I don't think that's true. I've never smoked a cigar. Are you thinking of a different podcast host?
Even more wasteful for you to be lighting cigars with the cartridge. You don't even smoke them. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, this guy. But yeah, this is a good game. I think we both would at least give it a recommend for sure.
I would definitely give it a recommend.
Yeah, if you don't like it within I'd say after level 3, once it starts getting a little bit harder where you can actually die, because it is very easy, the first 2 levels. You know, you'll know if you like it, and if you don't, then find another platformer. But
I
ultimately,
definitely
I think it's worth trying.
I definitely died before level 3, but I also have a tendency to play really aggressively, even with blind games that I should
It's
be playing
really
more
easy to die
conservatively.
swimming if you aren't careful, because
Yeah, I may have done that a few
and
times.
everything. Yeah. So really cool game. Hopefully you liked our refreshed review section. We're going to go ahead and take one more break, and then we're going to talk about the cool part of this game, which is the speed run. So as always, we like to dive into a discussion about the speedrun of this game. It's always different than the casual playthrough, and I think this game really shines like a star.
Oh no, not again.
No? Okay.
No, I'm gonna cut you off.
Sorry for all the hot air. The hot air.
No, I have the button that lets us go back to break, and I will take us. Do not make me turn this podcast
really
around.
Warm your heart?
Go
back in. Okay, so I'll move on from that. Let's do a quick discussion of the leaderboard. The leaderboard. So the any percent run is 27:37 for the world record by Dagron, but it's D4GRON. I'm going to say Dagron each time.
The O is a 0 as well.
The O is a 0. Thank you. So D4GR0N with a 27:37. Harem Scarum with a 27:44, 7 seconds behind. And then Chubbis with a 27:58. Those are the three runners with sub 28 times for the any percent. There's also a 100% run. Chubbis and Plex QLEX with a 36:08. There's also some miscellaneous categories. There's a boss rush category that Dagron has a 7:17 in, where you just fight the bosses. Any time attack, that's a 1:55 by Klex. But those are not quite as significant as the any percent and 100% categories. This has also had a history at GDQ, actually. 3 times it's appeared. Originally, 8 years ago. That's right, there was GDQ 8 years ago. SDA Classic Games Done Quick. Back when they used to just roll in on the trolley, and they would just, have their pipes in their mouths and like, see, right? Is that right? You remember those days? Or
I was gonna look up who did the Classic Games Done Quick. It was Breakdown, wasn't it? Breakdown was like the Ristar guy for a long time. It's Breakdown. I
should have put it in there. Okay, and then Breakdown also had an appearance at AGDQ 2015, where he had a 29:56, and then recently,
really respectable run.
Absolutely. And then at GDQ 2018, Listar had a 31:34, so just this past AGDQ. So a couple of appearances. It's a really cool marathon run, a lot of fun. And we're going to go ahead and, I guess, dive into talking about some of the stratagems here. So the run is generally done in normal difficulty, because in hard mode, many of the star handle strats can't be used, or they're much harder due to a lock in the feature that's actually mentioned in the gameplay. So the star handles work better for the speedrun tech in normal difficulty, so everybody just kind of runs them in normal, which I appreciate that the leaderboard's not full of all these categories at normal and then hard, if it's just better to run it in normal. Lives being the main difference.
In hard mode, like when you grab onto a star handle, like you're locked onto it, you can't let go of it or something like that?
I think something around those lines. Okay. I know I was talking to Liz, and that she had said that there was a lock, like a lock-in feature that. Oh no, it's after you let go. I'm sorry, now I remember. After you let go, when you're in that meteor strike mode, in normal mode you can kind of move around. You can do and you
have control of yourself, but
yes.
in hard mode, whichever direction you release, that's the direction you're gonna go.
You can't turn, you can't make any different movements, and so that's used a lot in normal mode to go ahead and avoid certain obstacles and do certain things, and you can't do that in hard mode. So why have a category with you're not going to really die a lot in the game anyway, so why have a category for hard mode? It's just
it feels like that would really prevent a lot of good strategies from working, because there's a lot of kind of little interesting skips here and there. A lot of them feel like they center around using those star handles to bypass obstacles in the levels. And I mean, when you release the star handle and you're just sort of zooming through the air, you're going so fast as it is. Like, being able to control that allows you to really make use of that and take it for a really long distance before it wears off. So
yeah,
definitely.
And that's a really cool aspect of tech that's also not really gonna make a big difference, I think, casually. Like, I tried to use it a bit. I reached a treasure chest. I don't know if I could have reached or would have had to done the star handle differently, but ultimately from a casual perspective, I don't think you would even notice those differences too much between hard mode and normal mode. But for the speedrun, that makes a big difference, and I think would take away a really cool piece of the tech. So we'll talk about some skips that utilize the star handles. But grabbing in general, just for tech, is faster movement than normal walking. So you'll see a lot of chained grabbing in between different, trees and stuff. I mean, the game, because that's the main mechanic, has a lot of stuff for you to grab, and you wouldn't necessarily have to. You could just run past it, but you grab as much as you can.
It's
And
not always super smooth, but if you're like within close range to a lot of items, you can chain it in a row to make it worthwhile. Sometimes, or at least visually, it looks like if you just grab an enemy, the sort of bounce back you get off of them may slightly invalidate the value of that. But if you can chain them together, it seems like it becomes a lot more worthwhile.
Yeah, and you can also use that mechanic to, chain grab across pits, reach places you shouldn't be able to get to quite as quickly. Maybe grab a bird and cross a pit that you were normally supposed to, do some sort of traversing of the level through. Also, you get a small speed boost running down slopes, which you can't maintain, like you said, which would be really nice, but it's still something that's utilized since the run's fairly optimized to, anytime there's a downslope, try and use that to gain some speed while you go down.
Yeah, the mechanic that Magical Quest did with that was really nice. And when I saw that you could gain some speed running down slopes, and that in the speed run, often they jump off of the slope in order to maintain that speed, I was like, cool, it's going to be exactly the same. And then it wasn't exactly the same. It was very disappointing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be nice, but it still adds up over the course of the run to be able to use some slopes. You can also climb walls with repeated grabs, which we talked about earlier. So that's used to, get over certain walls. And I wouldn't say unintended. It's not a sequence break. I think the game intends for you to learn how to do that and sets up some quicker paths with its level design, which, as we said, is a really nice touch. So I wouldn't call it sequence breaking, but it's definitely utilized whenever it can be to shorten the level.
It's actually really interesting because climbing the wall doesn't seem like the hard part. It's actually getting on top of the wall once you've gotten to the top. And it feels like that might be unintended. Like, it feels like that part, like once you get to the top of a wall where there's a ledge, actually grabbing in such a way that you can get up on top of the ledge doesn't seem intended. The only times I was successful with it was when either an enemy came within range so I could grab them to pull me up, or when there was like a chest right next to the ledge and I could use that to pull me up. But in general, it seems like they wanted you to be able to climb walls, but not necessarily be able to get on top of the ledge. I couldn't tell.
I would agree. I think you can tell when it does intend you to do that because it would put a pole there or something for you to grab
maybe
onto,
like
or at least a
ladder
bird
rungs or something.
Yeah, they have these ladder rungs we didn't really mention before that allow you to climb walls when they're there. And so when those are not there, you have to chain these grabs together, and this
is my ladder rungs
easy
impression. This is what it looks like. This is what ladder rungs look like.
For a podcast.
Yeah, I know they can't see that, but you can see that. I just wanted you to know.
I did see it. I know what it's like now, which is cool. Yeah, I would agree. I could get to the top, I'll chain my way over. So that's probably would be a sequence break or unintended. But a lot of times when you get to the top of those, you can actually it'll have something there for you to grab.
Right.
There's also some interesting tech in Planet Freon, which is the 5th level. There's this chain of platforms that are ice platforms, and you kind of have to zip all the way down one and back across and then jump to the next one. But you can actually cancel the slides out, and you can see that in the speedrun if you pull that up. It's kind of hard to explain other than you're saving a little bit of time not having to slide all the way to the end of the platform and back across.
Right.
And so there's a decent bit of notable tech in this speedrun, which is cool. I think any speedrun that has a lot of movement tech we're pretty big fans of, and this game having kind of this unique grabbing mechanic, it does utilize it in a lot of interesting ways.
I think specifically, I mean, there's a lot of little bits of movement tech that add up, and those are, I think, what really make a speedrun shine and what separates, the top runners from the middle of the leaderboard and the rest. But I think what really makes this run really impressive, sort of the big picture thing, is those star handles. Every time you see something like that, and a lot of them, actually being able to use them to save considerable time, doing them in the optimal way, is extremely challenging. Letting go of the star handle at just the right time can be frame perfect. Using that to fly over a level, something like that.
Yeah, so before we hop into the bosses, let's actually talk about some of the glitches and sequence breaks, because most of them do involve the star handles, and that is a really part of the speedrun. If you go watch it, as Chad's saying, when you're circling around that star handle and you get the full speed, it's a really, really narrow window to release the correct way. Some of these are frame perfect. Others are probably only a couple of frames window. So you've got this log skip just going ahead in, I think is it level 1 or 2?
Yeah, it's in the first world.
It's in the first world, at least. Maybe the second half, I don't remember. But you're usually supposed to be up higher in the level, and you see these two different trees. You grab them twice, the tree falls down, and then Ristar does a little like, "Hey, I'm happy I knocked
Yeah,
the
he's
tree
sort of
down"
like
animation.
sort of like stunned in place, and he seems
Yeah.
happy.
Which is something I did forget to mention earlier. The animations in this game are really good,
Yeah.
really cool. I think that's one of the real big positives to this game. I mean, it's very colorful. It's got great animations, great music. We didn't point that out earlier, but you want to skip animations if you're speedrunning because they take time. And so instead of having to grab both these trees and hit them twice and knock them over, you can have a really precise star handle release, meteor strike or whatever it's called, that skips you having to knock down the tree with 2 hits and do that celebrating animation. And it's a real precise one. It looks really cool. Definitely worth checking out. Go watch Liz's run at AGDQ or any of these speed runs to see it, and that's really cool. And then there's also another one of these in stage 4 you want to talk about, what that allows you to grab the metronome while shooting out the star handle.
Yeah, so the whole idea here is that there's a one of the metronomes that you're supposed to carry to later in the level actually is like midway down this pit, and so you can actually save quite a bit of time not having to sort of go around and grab it if you launch yourself out of a star handle and grab it right as you're going up. And if you time it correctly, you can actually grab the metronome without losing your momentum and carry it up on top of the ledge that you're flinging yourself on top of, which saves a little bit of time there.
Yeah, it's definitely a sequence break for sure.
A lot of the Sonata levels are built around carrying these metronomes around, and even though this is the only like skip we're mentioning, a lot of the way that the metronomes are carried around and manipulated is very technical. There's a lot of technicality to it, and doing it quickly. There's spots where you have to get the metronome to go up a floor, for instance, like you're climbing, and the only way to get the metronome up, for instance, might be to throw it on an air vent. But the air vents work on cycles, and so getting there at just the right timing to fall to get the metronome to go up and catch it right as you're going up takes a lot of skill. There's a lot to it, so
Absolutely. And that's a really cool stage to watch if you're looking for, hey, what's a cool part of Ristar speedrun I can watch to see if I would like to do the run or not. Just juggling the metronome throughout the level cleanly, like you said, being able to jump over something and still grab it at the same time, grab it and move, to the left as quickly as possible. Those things are hard to pull off, definitely. And this Sonata skip is apparently double frame perfect, says Liz in chat, but also considered one of the hardest parts of the run. And definitely an unintended sequence break to use the star handle to grab that metronome and get up top. And as you said, there's also a god cycle for the Sonata stage if you accurately move throughout it, to be able to get everything there. There's one other skip called the automaton skip. What is that one?
I'm not sure. I looked through the run, but I'm not familiar with what that is.
Okay, well that's the automaton skip. It's
yeah, so
the level automaton, and you skip something.
One of the things that we definitely want to point out going forward, one of the things we're changing about our speedrun discussions is trying to let you guys know who's active. So this isn't, I'm not wrapping up. John's like, hey, we have more we want to talk about. But one thing that you definitely should check out about this run is Liz's AGDQ 2018 run. If you're watching us record this live, it's actually in the bottom corner of our screen. But if you want to learn a little more about this run, what little we're providing to you, and you want to learn a little bit more what this is about, it's actually a really well commentated run talking about all of the little things that are going on along the way. So definitely make sure that you check out that run. We'll make sure that we tweet it out when this episode goes live.
For sure. Outside of that, there's also, a decent amount of execution and RNG involved with the boss fights. So the biggest boss fight RNG being the hammerhead shark attacks in stage 2. The hammerhead shark can do a multitude of different attacks, some of which you cannot attack them while they're doing, and some of them that you can. And that's just kind of one of those, you gotta hope that you get enough attacks that you can respond to versus, the ones where he stays away from the screen or isn't able to be attacked. And so that's kind of the high RNG point of the speed run at the end of stage 2. And then there's also a final boss quick kill that's pretty difficult to execute and is worth checking out for sure as well. And a lot of the boss fights are really cool. I know the wizard fight. You basically chain these grabs and you're able to kill him in a really quick cycle, a lot quicker than you would casually by kind of keeping Ristar up and grabbing him continuously, not allowing him to continue his cycle. And generally he goes away from the screen and some stuff falls from the sky and then he comes back on and then you grab him when he's in range, but you can actually chain those together. So a lot of these boss fights are really interesting to watch the quick kills on. So I definitely recommend checking out the run, as Chad said, and we'll go ahead and tweet that out when this goes live.
It really feels like a lot of what makes this speedrun shine is some of these boss fights. There's a lot of nuance to the boss fights, and even though the levels themselves are not necessarily always straightforward and definitely include different skips and tricks that you have to be able to pull off to do this game perfectly, I feel like the boss fights are really some of the most interesting things to watch because like even something that might seem relatively straightforward, though the level 1 boss fight, Liz mentioned in her GDQ run that's probably the hardest boss fight to pull off consistently, and when you see it done, especially if you've played the game before and you know what goes into that boss fight, it's just really satisfying to watch that boss go down almost instantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of RNG. I mean, we're not going to do a tutorial here, but there's a lot of RNG bosses. I know the first boss can go, I think, one of 3 directions, and one of those directions saves time, and a lot of these things add up. There's one boss that at the end of Sonata where you can kind of do a double grab where you can hit their hats and their head at the same time, and that saves time. So all these things, there's a lot of little optimizations throughout this run that are worth checking out. And again, really well commentated run, which is always great because a lot of these runs, it's hard to tell what awesome things are happening without good commentary, and so it's worth checking out. Who else can we check out if we're looking for current runners of Ristar?
Yeah, so Dagron's world record is from about a month ago, so I don't know whether or not he's been super active past that, but he's probably one of the more recent active runners you can check out. Definitely Lizstar, who provided a lot of the information that this episode was built upon. And then Harem Scarum was the previous world record holder before Dagron, another great runner who I believe is still semi-active. So
yeah, all 3 of these runners I checked are active, and Liz confirmed that are doing runs now. So go give them follows. You can check them some of these runs live, which is really cool. With the world record happening a month ago, there may be improvements still to come, and that's really cool. So it's a fun time for the Ristar speedrun scene, as there's a couple of active people. Apparently, Dagron just recently learning the run and breaking the world record, so hopefully more to come.
I mean, he's a really accomplished speedrunner. He was the one who previously had the world record for Adventures in the Magic Kingdom. That's what I knew him from offhand. So
yeah, there's a lot of other stuff. I checked his speedrun profile and I remember it being pretty impressive. So cool to see him getting involved, and the fact that there are people actively running this game now. It was just in GDQ, so it's a hot time to be into the Ristar.
Now's the time. You're gonna get into Ristar.
Everyone getting into Ristar game gear. That's what I want to know. Plug and play version. Yeah,
that plug and play version really divided the leaderboard.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead. That's the speedrun. Please check it out. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to answer some awesome Q&A questions.
So we have taken all of your fantastic questions that you've asked us on Discord, and we've pared it down to just a few of our favorites. This is another change that we're sort of talking about going forward, is we want to be able to spend a little more time on Q&A. So rather than trying to answer them all, you guys have so many questions. It's like you're looking to us for information, and I don't understand that. I would not look to us for information. But
I mean, Google exists, but don't tell them that, then they're never going to listen to it.
That's true. Yeah, I often
cut that out, Brian. Cut that out.
I often just take your questions and put them into Google to find the answers to them anyway. So,
yeah, like, what is your favorite food? And I'm like,
Google, save me.
Yeah, but we do want to give these questions a little bit more attention and try and flesh them out. And we also just want you competing over getting red on the frame savers. We've become a big deal. And for your question to get red on the frame savers, generally people get partner the next day. A lot of people have been getting married. It's a pretty big deal to get your question read on the Frame Savers podcast. So, but the first question comes from Ristar herself, saying, what's the threshold of too much RNG in a game? I've had people tell me Ristar is too much RNG and that it makes it a bad speed game. What are your opinions?
I think you need to talk to different people, because this is not a high RNG speed game, at least not the way I see it. I mean, you know, there's some people out there who prefer their speed games to be zero randomness, which I think there is a debate to be had there. One that I'm sure this podcast could facilitate that discussion one day. But the debate about whether or not a speed game is at its best when it's pure skill, like all you have to do is repeat the same actions and you'll find success, or whether or not the sign of a good speedrunner is being able to respond to a variety of situations. Sure. And personally, I am in favor of games with minimal RNG. I'm not a big fan of games where there is something that instantly ends the run. You know, sometimes there's a speed run where it becomes optimized, and it's like, well, if this boss doesn't give me exactly this pattern, I have to reset because I lose too much time. I don't like that kind of stuff, but I don't think Ristar feels like it's that bad of a speed game. There's definitely some bosses where
you could get bad enough patterns on the hammerhead. I'm sure, especially when you're doing, you need a pattern or you'd have to reset. Yeah, this would be a low RNG game for me. Can we have that episode where we just talk about RNG and we both smoke pipes and make maybe like 3-4 hour conversation about this? Or
can the podcast pay for me to get a tweed jacket with the elbow pads? And if
I can get one too, I want a tweed jacket. That'd be great. You're a professor, you should have one ready.
Well, I've been waiting for the podcast to pay for it. So
okay, that's fair. You know, I speedrun Final Fantasy VII. I speedrun some real heavy RNG. I think I like a little bit of RNG. I don't like the run being just pure execution. There's something about a run having like 2 or 3 points that make a big difference RNG wise that I like. I think a lot of people do like that. I don't know if it's that it takes the pressure off, that it just makes it different, builds, you know, some anticipation in the chat, maybe makes it a more interesting viewing experience than pure execution. I'm not sure, but I like there to be a bit of RNG. I think this is right around the right amount of RNG for speedrun. Some boss pattern RNG is always welcome for me. I don't know. I find it makes the run more interesting to do, I guess.
My dream RNG situation is where you have bosses that have completely different patterns that you have to respond to successfully as a skilled speedrunner of the game, but that all options ultimately can result in the same time.
Sure.
Like you aren't penalized. You aren't penalized by bad RNG, but you do still have to respond to it. I think that's like the dream situation. I think that's the game that has hit the perfect balance of RNG and skill.
I like having something to blame, though.
That's true.
Who am I gonna blame if it's just all pure execution?
That's true.
Like Demon's Gate did the thing to me, and then also when
a cosmic ray hit my console.
Yeah, I'm really bad. I'm really bad at Final Fantasy VII, and then like I'll die to Demon's Gate almost always because I'm bad at Final Fantasy VII, and people be like, "Oh, terrible RNG, you died to Demon's Gate," and that works for me because they don't realize that it's just because I don't know how to fight Demon's Gate. So.
Right.
No, but I actually do. For some reason, I do like some heavy RNG games. I mean, I'm doing Parasite Eve right now. That's a pretty heavy RNG game. We talked about that a few weeks ago in terms of getting re-encounters or not getting re-encounters. I like RNG in speed runs. I think it makes things really interesting. It also really rewards perseverance. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a balance for everything, of
I
course.
think that's also an interesting discussion as well, because at a certain point, once the game has enough RNG, it starts to all come out in the wash, right? Like, if a
Yes.
game has such a high quantity of RNG, then you're going to get some good luck, but you're going to get some bad luck. And the percentage of good luck and bad luck you get is probably going to be about the same every single time, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, Parasite Eve has a bit of that. You have like a little less than 50% chance of re-encounter, and there's 16 of them throughout the run. So generally, you're going to end up with 6 or 7 or 8 of them. You know, it's not too bad. Something like Final Fantasy VII is interesting to me because you don't. It's not necessarily about who's the best at Final Fantasy VII. It's like who's the most persistent
who's
person
done
in
enough
the
attempts
world.
to have gotten the right luck?
Like who A is a full-time streamer, because that you have to be. B is just willing to do it all the time, 7 hours in, 6 hours in, lose the run. Like, I don't know, it adds a little really interesting aspect to the game, I guess. I mean, even something like SMB1, which is pure execution, with when they were doing Fast 4-2, is almost like RNG. There's really no way to like be sure you're going to get Fast 4-2. So like you gotta get these moments where it's like who's the most persistent that they're gonna be able to pull off these tricks. It almost pure execution becomes RNG down the road if you get super optimized. It's really weird.
Yeah, I would say, going back to the question, the threshold definitely depends from person to person. It's some people really like a lot of RNG. I'm much more in favor of a pure execution game. I prefer my games to end up a lot closer to SMB1 rather than Clue SNES. You know, that's my preference. But I think it differs from person to person, and I think that there are some basic thoughts that go into what makes RNG a good fit for speedrunning. You know, if there's a lot of it, then it can sort of, you know, all average out. If there's a little bit of it, but it doesn't penalize you too badly, that can be okay.
I think the key one is when you have like 1 point of RNG that ruins the run or doesn't. That's when it's the worst. That's the only point of RNG I don't like. Like you said, when you have a lot of RNG, it does kind of balance out over time. But when you do have one of those runs where it's like, well, this is 45 seconds here and it's only a 10-minute run and you just have to get this, then it's just kind of an annoyance. So
right.
Sam Allman asks, in 2 sentences, what would your pitch for a 3D Ristar be? I like this question.
I already thought about this one, so I'll go first.
Okay.
I do not need 2 sentences. I only need 2 words. It already exists. It's called Chameleon Twist. So
I don't know. You're too deep in the weeds, my dude. I don't know. Yeah, I don't even know what that is.
So Chameleon Twist is a game for the N64 where you play as I guess like a lizard or an iguana.
Probably? Maybe a chameleon.
Yeah, that one works. Yeah. And he has like a really long tongue, so he can grab onto enemies and like pull himself toward them. So it feels like that's sort of what a 3D Ristar would end up being. Oh, I get it, because it's called Chameleon Twist.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was like, how would you know? But yeah,
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic now or what. I don't know what's going on.
I gotta be honest.
I don't think you even know. So
I was about to say, sometimes I'm not even 100% certain.
Chameleon Twist, starring Gex the iguana. I don't know if I have a pitch for it. My pitch would probably just be the Smash Mouth song, but I will say, listen, we got enough 3D platformers in the world. What we don't have enough of is like Doki Doki Literature Club. Like, we need an anime dating sim with Ristar. And which star is he gonna fall in love with? And like maybe the star becomes a black hole. I don't know. You know, it could be really good. I want everything to be turned into a dating sim.
I don't think I want to do this podcast anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm
out.
I mean, but realistically, I mean, I could see a pretty decent 3D platformer coming out of this. It'd be hard to make the level design as intuitive and interesting as they did in the 2D version. But I think you could do it with the poles and the different things. I mean, Mario 64 kind of did some stuff like that. I could see it being a pretty cool game. But I feel like ultimately it would not have been executed well. You know, like I just can't. It would take a really, really good job by a developer to make this game good in a 3D environment with the poles and launching yourself. And
yeah, this style of game, if you really want to preserve the feel of the Genesis game, I feel like you would really struggle to produce a good 3D game. Like, it just doesn't feel like it necessarily would translate perfectly.
Yeah, but it could. It
yeah,
could.
it
There's
could.
games that do this mechanic of grabbing poles and flinging yourself, so it would just be a matter of like actually designing a good game. But if they did, I think it could be really interesting, especially with the star handles and some of the combat, especially if it added a variety of combat where you don't grab enemies necessarily to kill them. You do a variety of things, or grab enemies and throw them at other enemies. More like a la SMB2 style, where grabbing the enemy doesn't kill it, but you can grab the enemy and throw it into something. I think you could have a pretty cool game.
Okay. And our last question from Discord was from our friend Space Cow, who asks, "What is your favorite idle animation from Ristar?" So I did a little bit of research when I saw this question. I played and I didn't ever really let myself idle, so I didn't get to experience a lot of the idle animations, which I forgive myself for that. But then I went into looking at what idle animations there are in the game, and there's a very obvious winner here. There's a very obvious choice for what is the best idle animation in Ristar, and that's in Freon in the snow world. If you idle when you're standing on snow, Ristar builds a tiny little adorable snowman.
Oh, I think I've seen that.
And it's very good. It's very strong. I love him. He is appreciated and needs to be protected.
I'm just confused. Okay, you're a scientist, right?
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
Computer scientist, which is the same as like Bill Nye and all the other people. So like if a star is near snow, doesn't the snow melt?
All right, John.
So he kills the snowman. So
yeah, that's true. Every planet he goes on just instantly catches in flames.
Typical Chad. Loves murder. Being all murdery here. I didn't get to see those. I think I've seen the snowman one, and that's really got to be the right one. But my favorite animation playing the game was when you get in the little baskets and you can climb up the poles or down the poles. Those were really good animations. So you get in these baskets, and it was well designed. There was like things shooting at you from the side, so you couldn't just go straight up, straight down. And he grabs your baskets on a pole, and there's poles next to you, and you grab the pole next to you and kind of pull your way up, using his little star arms. And I liked that animation. It was very adorable.
There's a lot of really charming animations in this game. I think that's one of the things that makes this game work so well, is whether or not it's necessarily on its own, whether or not it stands on its own as being the best platformer, it has a lot of things that just make it charming, which I think
the answer's not for that. I would just like to be clear. For the whether of not it's the best platformer, I think the not is probably.
You think you're going to tell me you think that there's a better platformer in the world?
Yeah, I do.
Which one?
Zen Intergalactic Ninja for the Game Boy.
All right. Well, that's been a whole podcast right there.
Okay. So would you call them Charminations?
I don't think I would call them Charminations.
No. Okay. That's fair. Well, those were our Q&A questions. Thank you. Those were all really good questions. I appreciate it. I think especially the RNG discussion. Always an interesting one, so definitely check out our Discord, and we have Q&A sections for our future episodes always there, which is really cool, so you can see what episodes we're going to do ahead of time, first of all, and then you can also ask questions, and you could too make this top 3 and possibly get married, which, as one of our chatters pointed out, isn't getting married technically also getting partnered?
Aw, that's really sweet. I never thought of it that way. Don't get too frustrated, though. If you take this and you say, all right, I'm going to join in on the discussion, our next episode's cart swap, so we really can't announce yet what games it is. So if you're like, how am I supposed to ask questions about that? Yeah, I kind of agree with you.
You can ask any question about speedrunning, life, love, food, video games.
Also, if you come and see the episode live, you can ask your questions there.
Don't you all want to get to know us better? They never ask about us. They don't care about us. They only care about the games. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the games stealing our spotlight.
I'm starting to think that people think the games are a little more important. We really need to knock those games down a peg or two.
So, if people are looking to see you do the games, and they don't want to see you, they just want to see the games, but you're going to end up having to be there, just, that's how it works. Where can they find you?
I have some videos on YouTube of just the games and not me. So if you want those, you can find them. But if you're willing to watch both at the same time, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube as Author Blues. Where can they find you, my handsome friend?
Definitely go follow him, Speedrunner, now anime, at Author Blues. You can find me on Twitter and as John Carls and on YouTube as John Carls1. You can find all of our content on theframesavers.com, including links to our Discord, our Twitter, and our Patreon. If you do want to support the podcast, you can find us at patreon.com/theframesavers. If you even just give $1 a month, you can actually have access to our show notes. That's something we recently added. We're pushing to try and hit $300 a month, and we'll do an episode on Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We also want to give a shout out to our $25 a month patrons, which are Tina Hacks, Kip, Drex, DDRREEXX, and
Mr. Pizak.
Mr. Pizak. All 4 of them are streamers. Go follow them on Twitch. We also just recently got another $25 a month patron we need to reach out to. So if you're listening to this $25 a month patron, hit us up if you want us to shout out one of your projects. We would love to hear from you. And as always, we want to just give a huge thanks to Brian Morgenthaler for producing this podcast, making it sound good. You can find him at bmorgstv on Twitter and Twitch. Thanks so much to all of our viewers watching us live here on The Framesavers on twitch.tv/theframesavers. We do these episodes every other week, and we are going to soon be doing content in between those episodes. So look for that. We're going to start doing world record reviews. So that's going to be really exciting.
Very soon.
Yeah, thank you so much to any of you who have also supported us subbing to us on Twitch, which you can do and get some cool emotes, so we really appreciate that. I know we got some subs during chat, so thank you very much. Anything else for you to say, my friend?
Go play Ristar. It's real good, but if you call it Ristar, you're not invited.
It's not Ristar. Until next week, peace.